We're in the sensory system. Scientists in the sensory system like to show you these slides. You think you know your world pretty well, but it's just an illusion your brain recreated for you. Your five senses, their job is to pick up the physical stimulus, the light, the sound, the chemical senses, and transfer them into the action potential, because your brain knows action potential. And they will send the action potential to your brain. So your brain pick up the action potential and recreate the outside physical sensation you feel. So your brain, all the brain have is action potential, and that's why they say, well, everything is created by your brain. And your brain, your spinal cord belong to the central nervous system. Both of them are well protected inside by the skull and the vertebrae column. Your brain and spinal cord, their job is to go to control the outside, the motor output, control your skeletal muscle, control your smooth muscle. And the sensory system, their job is this part. They pick up the outside physical stimulus and generate action potential and send to the brain. The outside stimulus will be picked up by your receptor. You have different receptors pick up different stimulus. So the sound need to be picked up by the ear, the light need to be picked up by the rods and cones on your retina. And this show you have different receptors, like the rods and cones, they are the one on your retina pick up the light, and the hair cells, that's the auditory, and these two are the receptor pick up the chemical senses, and these are the receptor on your skin pick up the touch, the pressure. So all of them, their job is to pick up the outside physical stimulus, and this receptor pick up the signal, and it will generate the inside response of the cell, will be activated the second messenger system or open some ion channel. And that's their job of this receptor. If they don't do so well, you won't be able to pick up the outside physical stimulus. And this receptor, they pick up the outside physical stimulus. When they change, when the sounds change, they need to be able to pick up the change, detect the change. When they detect the change of the stimulus, they generate membrane potential, receptor potential, is gradient potential. And eventually this gradient potential need to be transferred into the action potential, because only the action potential can travel for long distance and send signal to the brain. So these different receptors pick up different stimuli. Like all these are on your skin. These receptors, they're located all over your body. We call them general senses. Big input, your skin. So when we talk about the skin, we talk about these different receptors all over your body. And we call this somatic sensory receptor. You also have the receptor pick up the signal from inside the body, like in the blood vessel wall, like this one. That's the one we call them baroreceptor. You will learn that in AP2, in the blood pressure part. They pick up the blood pressure, and they will constantly send a signal to your control center, your CVCC, cardiovascular control center, in your medulla oblongata. So we call this visceral. So all this general sense. And you also have the spatial senses. They are called spatial senses. They pick up different stimuli. They're all located in your head. Your visual, auditory, gustatory, olfactory. They belong to the spatial senses. And they will go through the cranial nerves, go to your brain. These receptors can be put into different categories based on the stimulus origin. So if the stimulus come from the outside, ecteroreceptor. If they come from the inside, we call it interoreceptor. And you have the proprioceptor. detect the signal from your body. Those receptors can also be put into different categories based on their stimulus, like the mechanoreceptor pick up the mechanical response, your hair cells in your ear that belong to this category. Thermoreceptor pick up the temperature, chemoreceptor pick up the chemical signal, your olfactory, your gustatory. Photoreceptor pick up the light, nocioreceptor pick up the pain sensation. And also the receptor can be put into different categories based on the structure. You have the unencapsulated, like the free nerve ending. We talk about this in your skin. This pick up the pain sensation. Or you have more complicated structure. We call them capsule, like the Meissner capsule, Pacinian capsule. They're both on your skin, pick up the pressure and the touch. They're encapsulated receptor. All these receptors need to be able to pick up the signal from the outside. So the outside, this is an example of your gustatory receptor. And you have different flavor, like you take the salty is the salt, the sodium ion, so they have the ion channel. When you eat salt, the sodium will flow in through the sodium channel. And sodium makes the inside more positive, so it will depolarize the cell. When it depolarizes the receptor, you will open the calcium channel and cause the calcium influx, and calcium will trigger neurotransmitter release. So it turns out when you eat more salt, they're going to release more neurotransmitter, and this signal will go to your brain, you feel salty. And similar for sour. Sour detect the hydrogen ion. And we also have the other flavor, like the sweet, the bitter, or umami. And this flavor, they don't have the ion channel, but they have the receptor. It's a G protein coupled receptor. So when the signal binds with the receptor, it will trigger the signal transduction pathway, will activate the second messenger, and from the second messenger will trigger the calcium release. Eventually, neurotransmitter release and action potential. And this receptor will generate receptor potential. It's a gradient potential. So gradient potential is good because it can be summarized, and also it won't have refractory period. Refractory period is the time you won't be able to generate another one. It only happens in the action potential. Because of that, it can sum up. So you have a smaller stimulus, you have a smaller response. Bigger stimulus, bigger response. They can sum up. And either the receptor, they look like this. So they have a head, pick up the stimulus, and you have the stimulus, they change the gradient potential. Eventually they will generate action potential and the same signal to the brain. Or they have a receptor cell. This cell, its job is to pick up the physical stimulus, and they're going to release neurotransmitter. Then you have a second cell, usually we call this ganglia cell. It will generate action potential, and it will send the signal to the brain. So these are the separated receptor cells. And eventually, this response will generate action potential and send to the brain. Brain, you have interneuron. And your brain's job is to coordinate with the efferent neuron, that's the output part, the motor neuron, and it will go to control your skeletal muscle and control your endocrine gland. And this stimulus, you have a bigger stimulus, you have a small stimulus. All of them will be coded by the gradient potential that's in the receptor part. Say you have a small stimulus, you have a bigger stimulus. And the gradient receptor potential is gradient potential. So it's very good at coding the different stimulus. So smaller one create a smaller gradient potential, and a bigger stimulus create a bigger gradient potential. And they will generate, eventually they will generate action potential and send action potential to the brain. And action potential we learned is all or none. Either you have one complete action potential or you have no action potential at all. So you could not use the amplitude of the action potential to code the stimulus, but we can use the frequency of the action potential, because action potential have a very short refractory period. So turn out they can generate another action potential very quickly. So in the action potential part, you use the frequency. If you have a smaller stimulus, you create a small gradient potential, and it generates a low frequency of action potential. If you have a bigger stimulus, it creates a bigger gradient potential. Even though the action potential is the same size, but they can increase the frequency of the action potential. So eventually they can still use the action potential to code different stimulus. They use the frequency instead of the amplitude. Okay, let's take a break.